it's like making demo recordings. Back to being a music manager. Uh, Demo recording is very often just voice and piano or voice and guitar, and then in the studio, the re-recording it for public consumption, it has full instrumentation and multi-tracking, et cetera, et cetera. And that's when I choose to use colors are shadings in the studio.
Hello, and welcome to the Practical Palette Podcast.
I'm Tara.
And I'm Mark.
And I'm Charlie Hunter.
And we'll explore the world of fine art and representational painting through the lens of philosophy, art history, and our own art-making practices. Today, Tara and I will be talking about the maturity of color with our good friend Charlie Hunter.
And I will be talking about the immaturity of color.
Oh my God, I love the conversation already.
Yes. Well, hello, everyone.
Hello.
So, Charlie, we're so glad to have you with us. It looks like you are in your studio in Vermont. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct. And it's a joy to be here with you. You're two of my favorite people and favorite painters.
Wow.
I don't know if I buy that 100%, but I will take it, certainly.
That's quite the cool studio there, Charlie.
Oh, it's a great studio. It's in an old paper mill.
Oh, cool.
And Bellows Falls used to be a paper making town. And the thing that's really neat about this building is that you can't see it, but it's got beautiful open wooden ceilings and stuff. If I tilt the camera up, you may see, yeah.
Oh, cool.
And the windows aren't insulated at all, but yet it's warm in the winter and cool in the summer because it has heat pumps. And that is because the old paper mills, when the paper mills shut down and the water rights on the canal were sold to the power company, and in exchange, this building has free electricity for something like 500 years.
Wow.
So it's a great studio. It's enormous, and it's in a building that is now, it's all like glass blowers and soap makers and stuff like that.
I would be so distracted. I would just want to walk around to everybody else's studio. I'd be like, what's up? What are we doing today?
It's true. And there is a micro brewery down at the far end, and they're like, we're having a tasting today. Come on down. It's like,
Why
no,
not?
I've got work to do.
Do I? That's awesome. Nice.
Good. So what's the skinny? What are we getting down? What brass tacks are we getting down to?
Well, I thought it would be a really interesting topic to talk about in a pretty casual manner, the maturity of color. So I think this is kind of an interesting topic just because as someone who uses a lot of color and who appreciates other people, I appreciate a vast, variety of how people approach color. However, I grew up on Wolf Kahn and Ken Elliott and these people who are using really intense color. And as a younger female in this field, feel like there's kind of this reputation that color is somehow immature. Like someday I'll grow out of it kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? I guess if you haven't walked in those shoes, you might not know what I mean. But to me, there's this kind of almost like an immaturity, especially for females with the use of a lot of color. So I just thought it'd be a fun topic to talk about.
That's interesting, and it is interesting that you frame it that way, because as in so many things, those of us who sit in positions of privilege, a cisgendered white male, with a great education, there's all this stuff that's invisible to me that does not mean it's not real. It's just, I had a friend who was a kind of a brawler type, and he hated cops. This is when I was in my 30s. And, I was like, oh, policemen are nice. Well, they weren't nice to him. They were nice to me, So anyway, that is fascinating, a fascinating thing that's a fascinating posit. I certainly don't think of color as immature. I think of myself as being not very good with color, which is why I don't really use it very much. But I certainly don't think of myself as being somehow more evolved because I do not use I don't rely heavily on chroma. I'm in awe of people who have the sensitivity. To me, it's almost like it's like they say safe crackers used to sandpaper their fingers to get rid of as much skin as possible, so they're totally sensitive. That's how a good colorist feels to me. It feels almost like a superpower to me.
Mm.
That's cool. So tell us about yourself, Charlie. We want to know like the history of Charlie's art evolution.
Sure. I always drew, and my dad was a small town printer, so there was always paper, and my parents were very encouraging of doing stuff like that. So kind of solving problems visually was how I grew up. So it was very natural for me to keep primarily using visual language. And I was a graphic designer designing rock tour posters and album covers and stuff in the 80s and 90s. In the 80s. And then in the 90s, I became a music manager. I had started doing full chroma pastel in the mid 80s. When I lived in Northampton, Massachusetts, there was a woman whose name, of course, I'm blanking at the moment, but she was a wonderful teacher, and she did ongoing pastel classes. And so I was working just recreationally doing stuff with her in that class. And then in the late 90s, when I got sick of being a music manager, I wanted to return to doing art. And I started doing the pastels again, but by that time I'd really developed it into, I would grid off a photograph and then basically reproduce the image in pastel. So it was almost photographic, not quite, but very, very realistic copies of photographs in pastel. So I wanted to experiment with pigment. And so, without knowing it was considered plein air painting, as so many of us have the same story, just going outside to paint with a bunch of acrylics, which, now knowing what I know now, I'm amazed that I stuck with it. And I did a whole bunch of not terrible, but mediocre paintings the first couple of years. There was in this building, there was the Great River Arts Institute that did children's classes and adult workshops. And they would bring in guest artists like Stuart Shills from Philadelphia and stuff. And I had a deal with them that I was the water boy. I would drive the artists around from the inn they were staying at to where the class was, and I would get them coffee and stuff in exchange for taking the workshops. And I remember at a Stuart Shills workshop, I got so frustrated trying to paint full color that I mushed all my paints together on my palette and just started painting that way. And I remember Shills walking past and saying, well, that seems to be working pretty well for you. And it's funny, it's just how my brain processes all that information of reality and distills it down into a visual that I can manipulate in a way that I find satisfying and appears to reach people to one degree or another. And I think all of us have a different, it's like a dial where these analog receivers, and you turn the dial until you tune into something. And for me, I think eliminating, it always felt to me like I was mixing the right color in the wrong place, or the temperature would be, it was more frustrating than enlivening or enlightening to me. So in painting from life, I naturally gravitate toward monochromatic work. In the studio, I very much enjoy experimenting with color, because bringing that in, I mean, it's like making demo recordings, back to being a music manager. Demo recording is very often just voice and piano or voice and guitar. And then in the studio, the re-recording it for public consumption, it has full instrumentation and, multi-tracking, et cetera, et cetera. And that's when I choose to use colors, are shadings in the studio.
That's a really good,
cool. I know. I love that
good
story.
analogy.
Yeah.
It's interesting hearing that. Just in the last episode, we were kind of talking about artist temperament and how you kind of have to lean into whatever your personal temperament is. I mean, you certainly, I feel like you've got the skill set. If you wanted to brute force learning how to mix accurate color on location, all that, I'm sure it's well within your wheelhouse. But because that's not inherently the way you operated, you kind of leaned into the things you do extremely well, which is drawing and composition and texture, all those sorts of things. I mean, those are just heightened even more so because you really dial back the color. I mean, even in your studio work as well, you do have color there, but you're still incredible designs, great values, great drawing, all those things.
Yeah, the accuracy is amazing to me.
No, thanks. It's just, we're all storytellers. And so how do we tell the story? And you can tell a story, you can tell a story like Raymond Carver or Hemingway, where it's, he drank, it was good. Or you can be like Faulkner, where a sentence can run on for a page and a half. Both can be tremendous, but badly done. Both can be horrific. It's what is the way we best tell a story. And the thing that my beloved Betty Sue's art teacher in high school said to her, or said to the class, the great thing about art is you don't have to like it. And everybody has their own way of telling their truth. And it's, what I do is not going to be everybody's cup of tea, and what you do isn't going to be everybody's cup of tea either. And it's all fine. It's not that there's one correct way of doing it. The other thing I wanted to say is that, to me, I think of color as adjectival, that you can write a sentence, and if I can write a sentence and leave the adjectives out, that's very interesting to me. How do you make that artistic without the Baroque element of color? However, and I use that metaphor when I teach. I often say that I see color as adjectival. And someone in one of my workshops recently said, in the last workshop that they were in, someone had said to them, don't paint the noun, paint the adjective.
That's funny.
And I think that's amazing advice. That's great. And it's so different from exactly what what I say, but both are true. I love a world that can hold multiple realities, you know?
Mm.
Yeah, I think it's really important as a teacher to be cautious and just really explain that this is your way that you've developed that makes sense to you, that resonates with you, but it's not universal. Everybody has their own way. So I love that story.
That's that. And why do you think that? I always chalk it up to people's inherent insecurity. Because when we do these workshops, I'm sure you all have had the same experience of these people who are almost traumatized that they were told that this is how you do it, and if it's not how they get to their truth, they feel that they are invalid in some way.
Hmm.
To work through that is really difficult for them. Why do you think so many art teachers, and I guess any kind of creative teachers, will give these dicta that are so damaging to people?
I don't know, but that's something that I really, bristle at. And I'm just always, if anybody says anything in those kind of definite terms, and I've said this to students, I'm like, just run in the other direction because they're not open to the idea that art is a form of communication and everyone speaks differently. And so if you're willing to listen, you can see what people can make and you can really enjoy things, even if they're not, like you said, your cup of tea. Like I can appreciate the skill and dedication and passion and all of that somebody puts into a painting, but I don't have to like the painting. And, I think it's okay for people to say, I appreciate that for what it is, but it doesn't move my soul. And that's okay. I think people are very sensitive about that.
I
Hmm.
was listening to an interview with the illustrator Steve Brodner a few years ago, and he's had this great line: "Orthodoxy of any kind is just another word for learning disability." Which, when we get some of the instructors who are more dogmatic, or maybe it's more on the students who are just looking for answers, and so and so said to do it this way, so therefore that's how it has to be done. And when that gets locked in place, it just shuts down any other alternatives. Um, so I think it's to your question, it's I think it's a natural thing that happens in the learning process because we're just looking for answers. Um, and then when you latch onto something that makes sense to you, you can't let it go. Um, and maybe it's a cognitive bias where when something contradicts that, you're like, well, that can't be. Otherwise, my world's going to crumble. Um,
Hmm.
to be dramatic about it, as we are wont to do.
And since we're all landscape painters, we've all heard like, as things get away from you, they're cooler, and as things are closer to you, they're warmer, and all these different rules. But every single time you can walk outside and see the opposite of that rule. And so I'm like, there's always somebody breaking a rule beautifully, be it nature, be it human being, you know, um, kind of turning a composition on its head and making something that we've never seen before or something that's really interesting with whatever you choose. And that was one of the things that we were talking about too. We just did a podcast yesterday on Hawthorne on painting the book. And what was that phrase? I already forgot it, Mark. I have like the memory of a goldfish. He said, kind of like, if you're not thrilled about it and if you're not excited about what you're doing, how on earth are you going to give that feeling to a viewer, you know?
Mhm.
And so it's like finding that why and not letting all these silly rules kind of dictate where you go within that why, you know?
Right. Well, rules to me, I mean, Tim Kelly loves twitting me about the fact that Streamline Publishing has called my series of videos rule breaking landscapes and, breakthrough designs and stuff. But rules, they're basically guardrails to keep people from veering off into muddy fields and destroying their vehicle. Um, but once you know what the rules are, what makes interesting art is moving beyond those. It's here's a set of goalposts to stay within for making competent images. And then you move beyond them, and once you know how to do that. If you don't pay attention to rules from the beginning, the rules exist for a reason. I mean, in your guys' teaching, do you have the same experience that I and most of the people I talk with have, which is that people don't know how to draw and they
Hmm.
want to paint. They
Sure.
want, they want, and I think maybe that back to your maturity of color thing. Color is so compelling that people want that. Just like any kid hearing Eddie Van Halen play guitar wants to make Eddie Van Halen noises, even though Eddie Van Halen certainly could play anything he wanted to, and
Hmm.
wouldn't his noises wouldn't be wonderful creative noises if he didn't know the basics of music. And so people want to paint with those emotional, get into the emotion of color, but they don't know how to construct. It's like it would be like a chicken without any bones. So you get the drawing is the skeleton on which everything else hangs, it seems.
Sure. I was wondering if that's how they got those boneless wings, Charlie.
In college, we convinced
Just
Christine
kidding.
Bergen. We convinced Christine Bergen that the boneless chicken breasts came from boneless chickens. And she became a very successful gallerist in New York City.
That's funny. No, I do hear what you're saying, and I do think that there are, you know, we were also talking plein air, and I was saying that I have a hard time with the idea of awards in general, just because since art is essentially a conversation and it appeals to everybody in a different way, it's really hard to say this is better than that, right? Because that's one opinion, right? And there is that piece, but there is also the piece of skill development and accuracy. And like you said, the ability to do something. I think of like Mondrian, and he did these beautiful trees. I don't know if you've seen his trees, like, and then he took like these steps toward completely being non-objective. And, he couldn't get to that non-objective space without the trail behind him of all of the learning that happened for him to get to that space. So I do agree with you. There is a lot of people do want to run before they walk. And I think that's just in general the human will. Um, but yeah, I do think a lot of people diminish the value of drawing. And that was one of the things that we were kind of lamenting with Hawthorne in his
Mhm.
book. He was like, we both got on, we were like, man, he really hated drawing, didn't he? Like,
Interesting. Well, to Mondrian, to just pick up on that, as a child, my first art lessons were my dad, as I said, was a small town printer, and in when I was like 7 years old, a woman came into the print shop, and my dad had some of my gas station drawings up behind him in the office, and the woman said, "Who's what are those are quite good." And he said, "That's my son Charles. He likes art." She's like, "Well, I'd like to give him lessons." And she was a woman named Elizabeth Orton Jones, who was an illustrator, best known for doing the Little Golden Book of Little Red Riding Hood. And our first lesson was, she came up to our house and we went out in the backyard. There were a couple of apple trees, and we drew the apple trees. And then we went inside, and she brought out a book of Mondrian. And she said, here's a French artist who did apple trees, and showed me those beautiful apple trees. She said, "Now, this is positive and negative space. The tree branches are positive space. The space in between the tree branches is negative space. here is stuff he was doing with cathedrals 10 years later. And then she took me through that stuff and then into, Uptown Broadway, Boogaloo, the complete abstract. It says, but all of this is about positive and negative space. And you can see from the tree branches the through line into that complete abstract stuff. And that was, as a 7-year-old, my mind was absolutely in it. My DNA changed. It was the best lesson ever.
Yeah, what a great experience at 7. Man, wish
I
I
made
had
an
that.
8, 7 or 8.
That's no, I it's funny because you were telling the story and I'm like, how old was he? Because that's a very advanced topic for a young person, I think.
Well, they were pretty good gas station drawings.
I believe it. That's a great story. Yeah, I think everybody needs that mentor to kind of, help guide them in the right direction.
But the thing that, looking back on it, was so great is that she was a illustrator from Mason, New Hampshire. I mean, and I just a kid in Milford, New Hampshire. I mean, that what what a wonderful how wonderful that one human being can impart that to another human being without any, there was no academic credential attached to it. So lucky.
Yeah, that's a great story. I love that. I have a story. I desperately wanted to be an artist when I guess I was like maybe 10 or 11. And they used to do that thing. I'm like aging myself, even though I'm not that old. Um, and Mark and I were just talking about this the other day. Like, we didn't have the internet when we were kids, like, which is fascinating because, like, everything has moved so fast that even that statement seems ridiculous. But they used to have those. Remember in like the magazine, they'd have like a drawing of like a pirate and a
Or the
parrot.
pirate, or the little.
Oh my God, I wanted that so bad. And I said, "Mom, I promise I'll do it. I promise." Like, and there was like some door-to-door knocker person who came and knocked on the door and like sold us this thing. And I started it and I was like, "This is crap. Like, I hate this. I'm not doing this." And my mom's like, "You spent all that money on that stupid thing and you didn't even do it." She'll still to this day be like, "Oh yeah, remember the time the parrot sales came around?" And I just hated it because like they basically wanted you to put they'd have you draw something and then they would put a piece of like glassine or like tracing paper or something on top and like show you how wrong you were. And like that was what the class was. And I was like, this is crap. Like I did it good enough. Like who cares? So it's just kind of funny that I wish I had your wonderful illustrator lady. I feel like I would be much further along than I am instead of my pirate and parrot.
I always wondered what those classes actually were like. So it's great to hear.
They were terrible. My mom will still say that. Remember all that time, all that money you wasted that time? But
Was that the thing where you had to like do a little test drawing and then you'd send it in?
yes,
Okay,
you'd like mail it away.
yeah, I did
Yeah.
that. I didn't do the class, but I sent the pamphlet in, and
Uh-huh.
when I received it back, or their response is like, "Oh, this is amazing," and I think it's just to get you hooked. Like, yeah,
I
you're
know.
amazing, but with a little tutelage, you could be, you know.
Really good.
And luckily, my mom, being much more frugal and wise, was like, "No, that's garbage. Don't even mess with it."
That's funny. Yeah, I'm still reminded of that error.
Tara, what drew you to color and the way you use color?
The first pastel book I got was the Wolf Kahn book. He's done several, and so I'm fairly certain that it's just called Wolf Kahn Pastels. I want to say it's like from the 90s or something. And I just fell in love with the color, and um, I Do you, I don't know. So since I'm in like the pastel world, I feel like sometimes the names of people don't always translate, but there's a very cool artist, Casey Klon, who is in I believe Washington State. And I really liked the way he was using color. And I said, "Hey Casey, like, do you know anybody on the East Coast, kind of close to where I am in Maryland, that could help me with color? Because it's something that I want to learn about." And so he said, "Oh, well, I know this guy, Lou Gagnon. He's in Virginia." And I was like, "Virginia's not that far. I can get there, spend a day or whatever." And so I went to see Lou, and oh my gosh, I love his brain. I love the way he teaches. He's very philosophical, very deep thinker. And so I walked in and he has all these pastels like all over tables of colors and just colors everywhere. And he would give me a color and he'd say, "Make this color feel happier. Make this color feel quieter. Make this color feel softer or harsher or louder," or, like all of these adjectives that you pretty much the opposite of what you were saying. And so it was a real fun experience for me to try and figure out how to evoke a feeling with color in the simplest of ways of just a swatch of color and something around it, just really simple. And how much you can kind of sway the emotion of a viewer with that color. And so he was just so wonderful. I loved him so much. I mean, he's not dead or anything. He's still alive and well. Hi, Lou. But he was just so wonderful. I haven't been there in a while. I should go back and say hello. And so he introduced me to Johannes Itten, who has this book called Elements of Color. And it's very Bauhaus, very design oriented. But he goes through ways of achieving contrast with color in lieu of strictly value. So, when you're initially starting, I feel like you are trying to achieve contrast usually via the value bus, right? You're not really on the color bus exactly. And then just this idea that you can get the same thing with color was just kind of mind blowing to me. So he talks about, I believe there's seven or eight. It's like hue, which is the closeness to the primary. These are his descriptions. I feel like everybody has these little nuanced versions of what all these words mean, but for him, hue was the closeness to the primaries. He did saturation. He did extension, which is like volume, like how much of a color is in a painting can influence you. He did count value in the list, which I'm like, that's not really color to me. I find those to be kind of separated. And let's see, extension, saturation, hue, value. That's only four. Oh, warm, cool, simultaneous contrast, which is that attempt to make the eye vibrate. And I think there's one more I'm missing. But all of that was just really fascinating to me to figure out how to use those elements. So throughout teaching, I have actually isolated that and been like, when you're thinking of any of these things, if you approach the painting saying, "My goal is to like really think and focus on this one thing," like you can almost isolate each idea and then have a better understanding for it when you go to use it. It's not that you want every painting to be about one of those specific things, but that you could then kind of put them together in a chorus of being useful to you as you're painting. So, yeah.
Okay, so and then Mark, I'm going to ask you. Perhaps
I like that.
You're doing such a good job running this podcast for us, Charlie. Thank
I know.
you.
Thank you, Charlie.
Sorry, what a jerk I am.
No,
But
no,
I love it.
I do want to ask, how do you, what drew you to color and the way you use color? Because you guys use, I'm very interested that you guys are doing a podcast because your approach, at least from on the surface, from where I stand, it's very, very different.
Mhm.
So I would be interested in hearing what draws you to the color and the way you use color, and then I'd also be interested in hearing why you're doing a podcast together. But that's just
Sure.
me.
So my route to using color the way I do, I guess it's not, there's not a ton of deep thought behind it, I guess, or it's certainly not philosophical. Um, because I came into the fine art world via illustration and then plein air painting. Um, Plein air for me, the color portion of it always was this puzzle that I needed to solve. Because the thing that I loved about plein air painting was experiencing the light and seeing the light. Every plein air painter is going to say something to this effect, but that's really what it was for me, certainly. And the painters I was interested in when I was studying art history in college were like Caravaggio, for instance. Um, you know, Great contrast, chiaroscuro, all that, blah blah blah. And because I didn't have a good understanding of how to achieve that early on, it was this puzzle and that really tickled my brain in a fun way. So when approaching color, I really got more into the physics of light and how light affects color and the color that you're perceiving versus local color and all that. And and so when I first started plein air painting, uh, first guy I took a workshop with was Marc, who is another Vermont guy. There's something in the water out there. But of course, he's in the Richard Schmid lineage. And that level of accuracy, or it's not necessarily just accuracy, it's like a feeling of accuracy, which really has more to do with the values, but certainly playing with color temperature and knowing when to amp up the chroma and when to dial it back. And actually, a lot of the things that Tara was just talking about,
Hmm.
all those things are present, but just to a more dialed back level. So that was kind of it for me, and that progression has just been, learning more and more about um, how light affects color. But because nature is so infinitely complex, you do actually have a lot of room to play around with things. You don't have to be like matching color that you're seeing. You can get weird colors in there, and if it's helping the painting, just leave it. So that was part of my evolution, was to step away from what I'm seeing and learn to play around a little bit more. But as long as it's all still working within the world that I've set up on the canvas.
Well, this is so interesting to think about because your if your background is from illustration,
Mhm.
then color is really a tool.
Mhm.
And it seems to me that Tara's approach is kind of color as the subject almost. I mean, or at least the instruction you're talking about there, Tara, of
Hmm.
I forget the person's name, the person in Virginia who's not dead. Uh, but it if color is kind of the central, it's like the Joseph Albert's the color field stuff of. I mean, we that was as an undergraduate that was a required class was uh, color study was one of the basic art degree requirements, and how color is so affected by the color it's next to. I've forgotten everything except that. But it feels like color is almost adjunct, important, but adjunct to Marc's approach. And color is sort of central to Tara's approach. Is that fair? Does that feel fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, it's to me, I think the way you described color early on, more of an adjective, actually like really plays well with how I think about it. It's important, but like in my hierarchy, it's I've got drawing, value, color, and then edges way at the bottom. So
I have
I'm
to
going to
say,
say
I
this a
love that
million
you have
times.
a hierarchy. I'm like, you're so organized.
uh, but I do really think of it in those terms, where So drawing, I mean, I say this a million times when I teach workshops. So drawing is the most objective, has to be accurate. Values also very objective, has to be reasonably accurate. But when you get to color, you actually have a lot more room to play around. There's when you get into the grays and shadows, for instance, you can put almost any hue in there as long as it's the right saturation, right temperature, right value. Um, so it's important, but it's you've got a lot of wiggle room.
Like Patrick Lee would be a good example of,
Mm,
I would think, someone who just will put a bizarre color in there, but the value is spot on, and
mhm.
so our brain makes sense of it without even thinking about it. Seems to me.
I'm gonna make up my own hierarchy just because Mark did. Just kidding. I would say number one for me is actually composition before
Mhm.
drawing.
I
Um,
lump those two together, so that's
okay, fine. So composition drawing. Um, I think value is next and then color, which I'm a color girl for sure. Um, but value is more important to me than color, actually. I mean, I like that I know how to use color when I want it to do something for me. Um, but to me, value is king. Like, it doesn't matter what color you use if your values are right, really,
mhm.
any color. And I think there's also this really interesting. So I did a painting and I did this sky like this really bright turquoise color. And someone said, but like, why is your sky so dark? And I was like thinking, that is not at all dark. I don't understand even what your question is. And so I took the painting and I desaturated it, and you see how light that value is. And so I think people equate chroma and value in a way that is completely inaccurate. I mean, there are intensely chroma, very, very high chroma colors that are very, very high key in value. I mean, you get into pretty much any color has a very, very intense chroma, high key thing that exists in that color. And so I think it's always fascinating when people equate chroma with dark because they're not the same at all. So I would say like value trumps color. Is that what you said?
Yeah, yeah,
So I'm just following your
yeah.
hierarchy. This is great. We can agree on that.
I was hoping we were going to disagree. That would have been fun, but
Dang
no.
it.
Yeah, like, yeah. I was hoping for some fist.
Come on.
I will actually disagree with one, or it's not so much a disagreement, but I think I perceive chroma a little bit differently, especially plein air, where when I see a really bright color or a high saturation color in sunlight, it to me it feels brighter than what it is. So if you see a really like a blue tarp that's really bright blue, you got that warm sunlight on it. Quite often the value is still relatively dark, and
Mhm.
depending on how the light's hitting it. But um, sometimes you see it and you see bright saturation, bright value, but that's not always the case.
Well, I think at that point you would be having this comparative thing, which I think is always essential in anything you do
Yeah.
because what, like we said, any color next to another color is going to influence it.
Mhm.
If I were you, I would find that intense chroma, like blue tarpon light color,
Mhm.
knowing that there's tons of options available to me on the dark tarpon dark value opposite side of the spectrum. And I would establish that first, knowing that whatever I chose on the shadow side needed to just be, you know, appropriately darker than that. Do you know what
For
I'm
sure.
saying?
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
think we're probably in the same place. But
Oh, for sure. And I should say, like, it all depends on how you key the painting as well. Like, is it predominantly dark? Is it predominantly light? Because if it's all light and then you've got that tarp, well, maybe it is going to be darker if you've got like a really bright highlight somewhere that you need to amp up, you know. So it can go both ways. But
Well,
that I just wanted to
I
throw
would
that out there.
also I would throw in there. You need what is the role that the tarp plays in the story that you're telling?
mhm,
That it's the
Hmm.
painting,
Hmm.
because if the story is about the tarp, then you know then you certainly play up how the tarp relates to what's around it. If the
Mhm.
story is and it feels to me that people very often get confused and they feel they have to render everything as it is in front of them when they don't have to at all. That's the storytelling. I guess when I say story, that's really composition. You know, if the tarp is there and very intense, but it's over at the side, and the real subject matter is the barn, then then you don't have to worry about getting the tarp's actual relative value correct. You can
Sure.
knock everything way down. And I think it's tough for people who are part time, who are serious hobbyists. Put it that way. Um, to these hierarchies are so can be so daunting. Like I've got to get this right. That I've got to get my drawing right before I worry about my values and edges. It's we're all just blindly groping, and that's we have these lists, and yeah, we whenever we're asked to rank these in order, they'll switch around from month to month. You'll be like, well, actually, drawing is less. I think was it Tara you saying that composition, or Mark was saying no, Tara was saying that drawing was less important than composition. Um,
Mhm.
and I think that's right. I mean, I think knowing what you're, again, back to the analogy of a story, knowing what the story arc is the most important part of a story. Because I was a great, in fiction writing classes, I wrote beautiful descriptions, but nothing ever happened in my stories. No conflict whatsoever. Everyone got along. I kept waiting for something to happen. Nothing. Nothing.
That's disappointing, Charlie. Just kidding. Well, I think it gets back to understanding why you're even making the effort to converse essentially with a viewer. And that's why composition reigns as king, because everything that you do within that space and the way you've organized that space should support that story or that why. And I think people don't think of that. They just are interpreting information. And so to me, it's kind of like the difference between like a singer and an artist, a musical artist, where like the musical artist writes the music, they feel the feels, they lived the experience, and then they may not have this, amazing voice, but they can tell you the story because they lived it kind of thing versus a singer who they're given this beautiful song and they just belt it out. And yes, you're very skilled. I appreciate your skill set, but you didn't get to that kind of grit and that humanity and that feeling that I think people seek to connect with because we're all human and we want to hear those stories. So finding that essential why I think is very important. And so that's why to me composition is the way to get that story across. All the other things are like supporting cast and, but I think we're all pretty much in agreement on most things. Yeah, that's
Um,
funny.
I think the reason and this goes back to like what we were talking about the other day with Hawthorne, like so much of how we kind of organize all these thoughts in our heads differ slightly, even though we're
Mhm.
all saying the same thing. Um, so when I think about composition, there's so many of those elements that all have a part to play. So color contrast, that's part of composition. Drawing, that's part of composition. Value, all that. How you arrange those things within a composition. Um, so maybe I actually, in real time, I'm going to rethink my list.
Oh my gosh.
Um,
We have a
yeah,
hierarchy change on our
yeah.
hands.
All right, you won me over.
That's really funny. Well, it's funny to me that you even have a hierarchy because often I'm just looking at something. I'm like, how do I say the thing that I want to say? I have to have, if I'm looking at a scene, I'd be like, well, that needs to sit down and be quiet, or that needs to come forward or move backwards or be loud or be quiet and so to me, it's like, how do I get that message across is, the essential meat and potatoes of how I think about it. And so when I approach a painting, aside from having very strict value rules. Like that's something that I don't mess around with because that's to me essential in the representation of something because we've already said color can kind of be anything it wants to be. You can always make something feel warmer or cooler or brighter or darker with color, but the value is just so essential that yeah, I think value is definitely more important. Even though I'm a color girl, I love color, but and sometimes I'm like, Tara, you have to tone that down because it looks like a rainbow threw up on it. And you have to do that sometimes and just be like, okay, I went at it hard and it needs a little bit of quiet. And you can kind of knock things back, but yeah, I think just to me, values reign supreme. I don't have an image of it, but oh wait, I have my cell phone. I thought it was really cool. I did a class the other day and we were doing big shapes in the class because so many people you start teaching and you say block in the big shapes and immediately they have these tiny little marks and you're like, no, that's not what I meant. Like initially they start with that. And so this whole class was about seeing the biggest shapes that you could find first. And it was funny because I did the class and then I said, you know what, I'm gonna take that image and I'm going to so I put the demo next to the reference photo and then I sucked the saturation out and here, I'm gonna do this. So wait, where's my face? There it is. So on the I don't know which side. The one with the brighter light is mine, and then the other one is the reference. And so everybody, I think, thinks that I'm like this wild, crazy color girl, and I am, but I'm still like values reign supreme, and they're always the most important. And so that's something that I'm not going to, that's something that I think is so essential to the storytelling that I'm not going to change that part. Like I have to have that part accurate. So.
Mhm.
Hold on, I'm going to show it to you in color. You're like, Tara, this is not that kind of show, but
For those audio only listeners,
I know.
we do apologize, but rest assured, what she's showing is incredible.
No, I didn't mean it like that. I just meant like it's interesting to me to see that despite how kind of wild and crazy it is, there is an element of accuracy that I I don't think like this was the image in color, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just to me it was really interesting to desaturate it and be like, okay, the values are maintaining their structure that they need to be effective. And that's essential to me. But
Hmm.
Yeah, I think cell phones are a wonderful tool for the artist. As I mean, I'm assuming the listeners to this podcast a lot are artists, would be artists, people working on their practice. I mean, I say don't be afraid of using the cell phone and turning, snapping a photograph of something you're thinking of painting, and then look at it and turn it to black and white, and see what the values are and refer back to it. Don't paint off of the phone.
mhm,
Use the phone for exactly like what you're just pointing out, Tara, that your values still held together even as you're playing with those colors to you're diving into those colors, but you can refer back to what those values are to make sure that as you're working on that you're holding the relative ratios are maintained.
mhm. I think that's very important. Yeah. And so do you have, I'm curious, so what your pastels you said were kind of hyper realistic. Do you have any images of those? I want to see them. You should message them to me.
I could gimp over to I've got one sitting over there, but I'll email them over.
Yeah, I would love to
Mhm.
see it just because you can just, if you want to email us, because I would love to see, even in the media, it's kind of like exciting when someone like speaks your language, you know? And I feel like I would love to see how the pastels work for you.
They're pretty boring. They're pretty so.
Did
That's
any of
funny.
that mark making or just the feeling that you were going for at that time, did any of that translate or like continue on in your like say your plein air work? Just how you approach edges or anything like that?
I think an awareness of edges translated over.
Mhm.
And there's certain blending that you can get beautifully with a pastel that is, you can, yeah, I mean, the found edge, and then you can find an edge really well, and you can lose an edge really well. Um, and it's the language of pastel is so beautifully immediate because it's since there's no binder in there, or there's minimal binder, the the squooginess. It's like the suspension system of a Buick. Paint is like a Buick in that it's squoogey and everything can just turn into gelatinous mess. And pastel, it takes corners like I don't know, like a Mini Cooper. But it is, of course, if you get that whole way of building up color with pastel, which is what you start dark and work lighter, right? You don't want to put darker on top of light. Because if you do
Mhm.
that, then you end up with a squoogey mess. Then your little Mini Cooper is on its head.
Yeah, and you were talking earlier, Mark, about the blue tarp and how the white of the canvas informs the value that you're choosing there. And it's funny because when I'm teaching, I say, get this paper, a certain paper that I like, and I say it has to be mid-tone to dark color. I don't care what color it is. It just has to be mid-tone value to dark. And I heard somebody say once, I don't even remember who said it, if you're working on mid-tone to dark paper, you can make things lighter and you can make things darker. And if you're working on white paper, you can literally only make anything darker, right? Because everything's going to appear darker than that white. And so I like being in that mid-tone value range to be able to play back and forth, to push one way or another. Whereas I feel like when you're working on white, which is you work on white, don't you, Charlie? Or do you tone it and then squeegee?
Oh no, I generally work on a white surface.
Okay. Yeah. And so to me, there's something that's so jarring about that white that everything seems dark that I almost want to start with like a mid-tone so that I can kind of have a better visual of where those values are going to sit, you know?
The only problem with that is, I mean, I think one can build a workable system. You could build a workable system working from black, or you could build a workable system working from white or from midtone. If you work from midtone and you go too light in a value, how would you correct that in pastel? You wouldn't put a darker value on top of the light, would you?
Well, it's funny. What I like to do is when I am blocking that in, and I tell this to students too, that the pressure at that point is kind of the guiding light. So if I have any doubt in my mind that the color is or the value is either is not what I am certain that I want, I'm like, just use like 20% pressure. Like, don't attack that space if you're not sure about it, then just like leave yourself room for adjustment by reducing the pressure that you're applying so that your tooth is still available to you.
You're going in a little light in the value in the mid-tone working light. You're going light in the pressure on
Hmm.
that light area so that you don't over get too far. And and when you asked about my working on a white surface, yes, I start out with a white surface, but when I'm working plein air, virtually the first thing I do is slop a light mid-tone over virtually the entire surface and then blot out with paper towel immediately to carve out my big shapes.
Yeah. Mark, are you always working on white? Do you start with white?
I mean, it starts white, but then actually similar to Charlie, I'll basically do a block in and tone the canvas at the same time. So I'll pick 4 or 5 main colors, like sky, ground plane, trees, whatever. And then, yeah, slop them in. I'll pick like 3 values. So like a light, medium, dark, depending on what the scene is. But I like to start there. So it gives me a general idea of what's happening within the painting. And then I can start pretty quickly. I'll pop in like my darkest dark and my lightest light so I can get that full value range in there.
Hmm.
And it helps to have a good reference for any value in between. So
That's sort of blocking in. There's your basic story arc, which is the big shapes, and
mhm.
then kind of the lightest light and the darkest dark are like, they're not quite characters in the story, but they are establishing almost benchmarks that
Yeah,
work off of.
you've got your extremes. So now we know where everything has to fall in between those.
Hmm.
Charlie, could you actually describe kind of your plein air process?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. First, you find the shade, then, then you find what you could conceivably paint from there. This is assuming with summer. If it's winter, or if it's a windy day, first you find a place out of the wind, and then you figure out the composition. And then I use a Soltech easel, and I always have my palette arranged the same way because I do not want to be fighting about where did I put this. And that's the thing I would urge people who are just getting going in their practice to do, is to always set up your palette the same way so you know where everything is. And then I mix a slurry of my paint, and I slop it on the surface. And I use water mixable oils, so it's a watery slurry of paint. No additional oil at that point. I slap it on with a chip brush from the hardware store, and then I blot out my big shapes, carve out my big shapes with paper towel. It's basically the Richard Schmid monochromatic block-in, you know. And then I let the water evaporate, and then I've got a very, 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 very thin layer of uncured linseed oil. That's what water mixable oil is, of course.
Hmm.
True oil color. So the water is gone. The uncured linseed oil paint is on the surface, and then I don't know. I don't think there I'm going to establish my darkest dark, my lightest light. But I would say probably the lightest light is pretty much established in that carving out the big shapes. But then I start really kind of drawing with, generally with either palette knife or brush. Squeegee is used. Squeegee is what I'm known for, but I don't use it that much. You know, I use it certainly for putting in the vertical of a utility pole,
Hmm.
or a guardrail, or anytime I want that man-made light dark, hard edge. It's unparalleled for either an additive or subtractive hard edge. In fact, I would commend to the viewer my excellent streamlined video, edges, breakthrough techniques for some, but it is basically, I try to get the painting, a plein air painting, hopefully is done within an hour and a half, 2 hours of start, because even if you're painting on a overcast day, the transit of light does change, My preference, of course, is an overcast day. because then you can get 3 hours, three maybe 4 hours. But it's basically get the big shapes in, start carving out the design, additive, subtractive. I'm always putting paint on and taking paint off. I remove as much paint as I put down.
Mhm. So you kind of suckered me into a trap I think a lot of us artists fall into, where you see someone doing something really cool with a tool and you're like, oh, if I had that squeegee, and let's
Oh,
see.
look.
Oh, look at that.
You inspire, Charlie.
And
And
that's
it's sat collecting dust right next to my palette for the last 5 years. So
That's funny.
all right.
um,
Well,
oh, go ahead, Charlie.
how 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 long do these here go? How long do you do this for?
I think this has been a great discussion. What do you I think we're good.
Yeah, yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah, I don't know that we really had much of an agenda here other than to
Yeah.
just talk about color a little bit, get to hang out with Charlie, and
Now, you
uh,
guys are going to be my guest next week on my Reasonably Fine Art Talk, right?
Yeah.
yeah, actually, we should plug that. So, reasonably fine art talks, everyone, on YouTube, and you go live
Oh, yeah,
on Facebook as
they're
well.
on the YouTubes and on the face plants, but I suggest people go to the YouTubes because they're always up on the YouTubes. You just type in there Reasonably Fine Art Talks, it'll take you right over there. There are 140 of the damn things by now.
Wow. Yeah, we're like babies. We're crawling right now. Charlie's running a marathon. We're not in your league yet, but
Yeah.
hopefully we'll get there.
Actually, before we go, I do want to ask, how did the Reasonably Fine Art Talk start for you?
It started out of complete envy of my girlfriend. Betty Sue during the pandemic. Betty Sue was down in Austin, Texas, and she started doing something called the Nobody's Happy Hour. And the Nobody's Happy Hour, she was every week. It was wonderful. It was wonderful because it was during the lockdown, and she had the Wheel of Misfortune. And the Wheel of Misfortune behind her, she'd spin it, and it was either like a song she wanted to play, audience request number, interpretive dance number, whatever. And so if it's an audience request number, it would be a song that she didn't know, but the audience did. And so she would call up the lyrics, using the internet, and then sing a song. And sometimes it sounded a lot like the actual song it sounds, and sometimes it would sound nothing like it. And and as it got going, she'd have musical guests and stuff. But it was every week, and there were about 40 people who would tune in every week, and it was just such an enjoyable way to build community in a time when community could not be built.
Hmm.
I started doing Reasonably Fine Art Talks, and I just so enjoy. I assume you're probably experiencing this as well. I mean, how much fun it is to talk about art with, because painting is such, we're so isolated all the time, you
Mhm.
know, and to really kind of talk about process, and to hear how other people are approaching this it's just a lot of fun.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well,
far,
we're looking forward to it.
we're on episode 4, so we're
When I said crawling, I meant we were just born.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. But so far that has been, or I'll speak for myself. That's been my experience. At first, I was like, do we even have that much to say? But then, yeah, when we were talking about plein air on the second episode, we talked for over 2 hours, and I think we need to do a couple more episodes to like actually cover all the stuff we didn't really get to. Um,
Well,
so
next week I will grill you guys about how you decided to do this, how your friendship is built, um, and we'll really talk about that, as well as your artistic practice. If you guys could each get me like half a dozen images that you are uh, that you would like to talk about, that would be great too.
Sounds
Mhm.
good.
Yeah.
We can do that. All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode and listening to us talk to the amazing Charlie Hunter. Thank you for joining us.
Yes.
Oh,
Thank you, Charlie.
what a
Yeah.
class. Thank you so much for having me. It was great fun.
Yeah, and join us on the Reasonably Fine Artist when that is released. I'm sure it's not the same day, but maybe it is.
Oh, we do it live.
Oh, live, live, live. Okay, same day. There you go. Join us for that. And thanks for listening. And you got anything else, Mark?
I do not. I think
All
we're all
right.
good.
All right. Happy painting, everybody.
Happy painting.
Happy painting, everybody. Oh.
I
Oh.
love it. That was great.